My son pressed my hand under the table. 3 short squeezes, careful and deliberate. It was the same signal we had used years ago when he was 7 and wanted to leave somewhere without drawing attention. Now he was 31, and we were seated at my dining table with his girlfriend of 4 months, a woman named Alicia Drummond. She was explaining an investment property she was helping her clients purchase in Kelowna. I smiled politely across the table and poured more wine for everyone. Outwardly, everything looked normal, but inside, I was fully alert. My name is Gordon Whitfield. I'm 63 years old. I spent 22 years working with the OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police, in financial crimes before taking early retirement. After that, I spent another 11 years consulting for the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario. My work involved reviewing fraud cases, training investigators, and interviewing some of the most convincing, charismatic, and dangerous people I had ever encountered. And at that moment, I believed I might be sitting across from one of them. I just didn't yet know how serious the situation was. My wife, Carol, was in the kitchen finishing the pie. She came in, smiling, placed the plate on the table, and asked Alicia about her drive from Toronto. Nathan, my son, laughed at something Alicia said and lightly touched her hand. On the surface, he looked happy. Nathan has always had a strong poker face. That trait came from me. But he had also squeezed my hand 3 times. We had created that signal years ago after a Christmas dinner when he was in 2nd grade. My brother Douglas, who could speak endlessly about municipal water infrastructure, had cornered Nathan in the hallway and talked to him for nearly 45 minutes. After that evening, Nathan and I came up with a quiet signal. 3 squeezes meant, I need help getting out of this situation, but I don't want to make it obvious. It became our private code. We hadn't used it in more than 10 years. Tonight, he used it again, immediately after Alicia finished describing her work. She had introduced herself as a private wealth facilitator, not a financial advisor, and not an investment broker, a private wealth facilitator. She said the title confidently, like someone who had practiced it many times. She explained that she worked with a small group of high-net-worth clients. Her role, she said, was to help them place money into alternative asset structures that traditional banks typically did not offer. These included real estate investments, private lending pools, agricultural land trusts in the Okanagan, and energy infrastructure partnerships in Alberta. There's a whole world of returns that most people never even hear about, she said. Her tone was warm, almost generous, as if she were sharing useful knowledge rather than boasting. I nodded and asked what type of oversight those investment structures had. She smiled. It was a very effective smile, open, patient, and reassuring. She explained that the reduced oversight was actually part of the advantage. With less regulatory friction, capital could move quickly, which allowed investors to capture higher returns. Less regulatory friction, I repeated calmly. Exactly, she replied. Carol looked at me across the table. After 36 years of marriage, she knows my expressions better than anyone. She could see something changing behind her eyes, even though I was careful not to show it openly. She quietly stood up and asked Alicia if she would like to see the back garden before the daylight disappeared completely. Nathan waited until the back door closed. Then he leaned forward, placing both elbows on the table. He looked at me the same way he used to when he was a teenager and needed to discuss something serious. I know what you're thinking, he said. Tell me what I'm thinking, I replied. You think something about this doesn't add up. I think I'd rather hear your side first, I said. How long has this been going on? He rubbed the back of his neck. It was clear he hadn't been sleeping well. I had noticed the dark circles under his eyes earlier and the way he had been quieter than usual during dinner, sometimes laughing a second later than everyone else. She moved in with me 6 weeks ago, he said. Her lease ended, and she said she needed about 2 months to figure out her next place. I didn't think much about it. I wanted her there. He paused for a moment. But then she started talking about my RRSP.
He looked down at the table. She said I was leaving money on the table. She told me she could help restructure it into something that would grow 3 times faster. She said it was completely legal, just not something traditional advisors recommend because they earn commissions from keeping clients in mutual funds. I kept my voice steady. "How much has she asked you to move?" I asked. "She hasn't asked yet," he said. "She's been leading up to it, showing me documents, prospectuses, she called them." He took a breath. They were for something called the Lakeshore Private Capital Fund. It looked legitimate. There were logos, a registered address in Vancouver, and performance charts going back 8 years. "Nathan," I said, "how much do you currently have in your RRSP?" He looked directly at me before answering. $240,000.
I sat quietly for a moment, thinking it through. "She doesn't know what I did for a living," I said. It was more of a statement than a question. "I told her you were retired from the OP," Nathan replied. "She said that was impressive." He paused briefly. "But she said it like she already knew and didn't care, like it never occurred to her that it mattered." That detail told me something. Either she was extremely confident or unusually reckless. In my experience, those two traits often belong to the same person at different stages of the same career. "Has she shown you any contracts?" I asked. "Anything she wants you to sign?" "She emailed me something last week," he said. "A subscription agreement, that's what she called it. She said there was no rush, but the next intake window for the fund closes at the end of the month." Artificial urgency. It is one of the oldest tactics used in fraud, the closing window, the last available opportunity, the seat that will disappear if you hesitate. Genuine investment funds do not operate with short intake windows that expire in 3 weeks. "I need you to forward that email to me," I said, "tonight before she leaves." "Dad!" "Nathan," I interrupted calmly, "I'm not telling you who you should be with. I'm simply asking you to let me review a document, that's all." He nodded slowly. A few minutes later, Carol and Alicia came back inside, laughing about a neighborhood cat that had wandered into the garden. Alicia remained friendly and relaxed for the rest of the evening. She helped clear the dishes without being asked. She remembered that Carol preferred her tea without milk. She asked me about a case I had mentioned earlier during dinner, a real estate fraud ring in Barrie that had been in the news. She listened attentively and asked thoughtful follow-up questions. She was skilled at this, very skilled. After they left, Carol stood quietly at the kitchen sink for a while without speaking. "I noticed it too," I said. "You noticed I went completely still when she mentioned less regulatory friction," Carol replied. "That's the expression you get when you're deciding how to deal with something." "I need to make a few calls tomorrow," I said. Carol dried her hands with a dish towel and turned toward me. "How serious do you think it is?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I answered, "but Nathan has $240,000 in an RRSP, and his girlfriend, who moved in 6 weeks ago, is guiding him toward an unregistered investment vehicle with a deadline at the end of the month." Carol carefully placed the dish towel on the counter. "All right," she said. "What do you need me to do?" That is the advantage of 36 years together. You don't need to explain every detail of a problem. You only need to state the weight of it, and the other person understands. That evening, Nathan forwarded the email. It contained a 17-page document. It looked professional, clean formatting, structured sections, and a watermarked letterhead from a company called Lakeshore Private Capital Corporation. The document listed a registered address on West Georgia Street in Vancouver. At the end, there was a disclosure section written in dense legal language that most people would skim quickly and ignore. I did not skim it. I spent 2 hours reviewing it at the kitchen table after Carol went to bed. The performance chart claiming 8 years of returns listed no external auditor. The section describing investor protections referred to something called the Lakeshore Capital Investor Assurance Program, which was supposedly detailed in a separate document that was neither attached nor linked.
The minimum subscription was listed at $25,000, with preferred allocations available for commitments over $100,000. The stated strategy involved private credit facilities secured by physical assets. That wording could mean almost anything or nothing at all. When I searched the West Georgia Street address, it turned out to be a business registration service. It was the kind of mailing address that costs around $40 per month and forwards your correspondence. It was not an actual office and not a functioning firm. I knew two people I could contact. The first was Sandra Oy. She had previously led white-collar investigations for the RCMP in Toronto before moving to the Ontario Securities Commission. We had worked on several cases over the years. She didn't owe me anything, but we respected each other's work, and she answered her phone. The second was Paul Trevick. For 20 years, he had served as a forensic accountant for the Crown Attorney's Office in Hamilton. Now he operated his own practice. Paul could review a financial document and quickly determine whether the numbers were constructed honestly or designed to mislead. I sent both of them messages that night asking if they could speak the next morning. Sandra called first at 8:15. I gave her the name Lakeshore Private Capital Corporation, the West Georgia address, and Alicia Drummond's name. She paused for a moment before replying. "Give me an hour," she said. Paul called at 8:45. I read several sections of the subscription agreement out loud over the phone. Twice he interrupted me and asked me to repeat specific passages. When I finished, he was silent long enough that I wondered if the call had disconnected. "Gordon," he said finally, "the section about asset-backed security, the physical assets they claim secure the credit facilities, there is no description of what those assets actually are. None." He continued, "A legitimate private credit fund would include a schedule listing the collateral. This document provides nothing. The language is empty. It's a frame without a painting. You could put anything inside it, or nothing at all. If someone invested, and later the fund reported that the assets depreciated or the credit facility failed, there would be no way to verify whether those assets ever existed." Sandra called back at 9:50. "She's real," Sandra said, and I recognized the flat tone in her voice that meant the situation would not be simple. Alicia Drummond, 34 years old, grew up in Sudbury, studied business at Laurier. She worked 3 years at a legitimate wealth management firm in Mississauga before she was dismissed. The firm filed a complaint with the Financial Services Regulatory Authority. The case is closed, but the record still exists. "What was the complaint?" I asked. "Inappropriate relationship with a client," Sandra said. "The client was a 68-year-old widower. He moved $70,000 into a private fund on her recommendation before the firm discovered it. The fund was not registered. The money disappeared. The client declined to pursue criminal charges, family pressure. Apparently, he was embarrassed." I closed my eyes briefly. It was a rehearsal, a smaller version of the same scheme, tested and refined. "Has Lakeshore registered anywhere?" I asked. "No," Sandra replied. "There is no registered fund by that name in any province." So she's running a direct fraud. That appears to be the case. The question is whether we can gather enough evidence before she takes the money and disappears. She paused before asking the next question. How close is she to asking for the funds? She has already sent the subscription agreement. There's a deadline at the end of the month. How much money is at risk? My son's retirement savings, $240,000. There was another pause, shorter this time. Sandra and I had handled cases like this for years. We had both spoken with families who lost everything. This time, the situation was far closer to home. "All right," she said, "we need to handle this carefully. If she becomes suspicious, she will disappear. We've seen this before. People who run these operations usually have exit strategies, clean identities, minimal physical presence, and the ability to relocate to another city within 48 hours. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "I need Nathan to meet with her one more time, and I need her on recorded audio making the investment pitch and asking him to commit funds." He continued explaining. In Ontario, a person can legally record a conversation they are part of without informing the other party. If Nathan records the discussion himself, using his own phone, that recording is admissible. Nathan will have questions about this, I said. I know, but Gordon, he came to you. He gave you the signal. He already senses something is wrong. He's been waiting for you to show him what to do next. She was right. That evening, I drove to Nathan's apartment. He opened the door wearing a t-shirt, his hair still damp. His expression showed that he had been anxious the entire morning. We sat down on his couch, and I explained everything: the West Georgia address, the missing auditor, Paul's analysis of the agreement, the earlier complaint in Mississauga, and the widower who lost $70,000 and felt too embarrassed to report it. Nathan remained very still as he listened. "She told me she loved me," he said eventually. His voice was quiet rather than angry, the tone people use when they begin to understand that something they trusted completely may not be real. "I know she said that," I replied. "You mentioned it last week." I didn't add anything else. There was nothing I could say that would make the realization easier. After a while, he looked up at me. "What do I need to do?" I explained the recording plan. I told him he would need to meet with her and allow her to present the investment fully, let her explain the fund, the timeline, and the amount she expected him to commit. He would need to remain calm and avoid giving her any sign that his perspective had changed. "Can you do that?" I asked. He met my eyes with the same steady look he had as a child, the one that never avoided difficult situations. "I spent 6 weeks trying to convince myself nothing was wrong. Yes, Dad, I can sit across from her for an hour." That evening, he called Alicia and told her he had been thinking carefully about the subscription agreement. He said he had a few questions before making any commitment.
She suggested meeting for coffee on Thursday afternoon. Her tone was warm, relaxed, and positive, everything carefully balanced so Nathan would feel completely comfortable. On Thursday morning, I drove to Nathan's apartment again. We sat at his kitchen table while I explained exactly how he should handle the conversation. He needed to keep his phone in his front shirt pocket with the screen facing inward. The recording would run through the voice memo app. His role was simple: allow her to talk. Do not rush the conversation. If she paused, let the silence remain. People often fill silence themselves. He should ask neutral questions for clarification, avoid sounding confrontational, but also avoid appearing overly eager. The goal was to appear like someone who was close to agreeing but still considering the decision. Nathan nodded as I went through each step. "How are you feeling about this?" I asked. He looked out the window for a moment before answering. "Honestly, angry, but it's a calm kind of anger, the kind where you just want to finish dealing with it." "That's the right kind," I said. "Hold on to that." I drove home afterward and sat in the kitchen with Carol. We didn't speak much. She made tea, and we listened to the radio while we waited. At 4:17 p.m., Nathan sent a text message. "Done. I have everything. Calling you in 10 minutes. When he called, his voice sounded steady but slightly strained, the way voices often sound when adrenaline is still fading. He explained that Alicia had presented the investment clearly and completely. She described the structure of the fund and the projected returns. According to her, investors could expect between 18 and 22% annually, a figure so far beyond the normal range of legitimate investment funds that it almost acts as a signature of fraud. She also explained the intake deadline and mentioned that Nathan could receive preferred allocation if he committed more than $100,000. Then she described the wire transfer process and provided the account details. The account, she said, was located at a credit union in British Columbia. She said the fund managers prefer working outside the large banks because transfers move faster. She also said my money would begin working for me within 72 hours of the transfer. 72 hours. I knew exactly what that meant. By the time anyone realized the fund did not exist and the account had already been emptied,
72 hours would have been enough time to move the money through multiple layers, making recovery extremely difficult. That evening, I called Sandra and told her we had obtained the recording. She asked Nathan to send the audio file securely, which he did within the hour. Sandra listened to it overnight. The next morning, she called at 7:30. "It's enough," she said. "We're moving today." I did not ask for details about how the operation would unfold. That was not my role, and it was not Nathan's. What I do know is this. Alicia Drummond was arrested at Nathan's apartment on Friday morning before 8 o'clock. I know because Nathan called me while it was happening. He was standing in the hallway outside his own apartment door, wearing socks, speaking quietly into the phone. "They're inside, Dad. It's happening." "Good. Put on your shoes and step outside. Get some fresh air." The investigation that followed revealed that Alicia Drummond had used variations of the same scheme in 2 other provinces. The Lakeshore Private Capital Fund was only one of 3 fraudulent investment vehicles she had created. Across all confirmed victims, 8 people in total, the financial losses exceeded $900,000. Some victims had already transferred money before Nathan ever met her. He was the first person involved who had not lost a single dollar. 2 weeks later, Nathan came over again for Sunday dinner. It was just the 3 of us, Nathan, Carol, and me. Carol prepared her roast chicken, the same recipe she had been making since Nathan was a baby. We sat at the same dining table where 4 months of careful and calculated deception had almost succeeded. Nathan was quiet for most of the meal. It wasn't the same anxious silence from before. This time it felt calmer, the kind of quiet that follows the end of something difficult. After dinner, he helped Carol wash the dishes without being asked, just as he used to when he was younger. When she went upstairs to call her sister, Nathan returned to the kitchen table and sat across from me with a coffee mug in his hands. "I keep asking myself how I didn't see it," he said. "You did see it. That's why you used the signal," I replied. He thought about that. "I mean earlier," he said, "before things got that far." I looked at my son. I had watched him grow from a child who once needed a quiet hand signal to escape a long conversation with his uncle into a man who had calmly sat across from someone trying to destroy his financial future and held himself long enough to help stop her. "Nathan," I said, "she was extremely skilled at what she did. She had practiced this before. She knew exactly which pressures to use: affection, trust, and the promise of belonging to something exclusive that others could not access. That isn't a failure of intelligence on your part. It's the result of someone investing time and skill into deception." He nodded slowly. "It doesn't feel good," I continued, "and it shouldn't. But here is the important part. When your instincts told you something was wrong, you listened. You didn't completely ignore that feeling. You reached out for help. That decision made everything else possible." He nodded again. "Most people don't do that," I added. "That's the real tragedy in cases like this. People sense that something isn't right, but they convince themselves they're being paranoid. They feel embarrassed to ask questions, or they don't want the relationship to turn out differently than they had hoped. So they wait. And while they wait, the opportunity disappears, the money moves, and the person responsible is gone." For a moment, we sat quietly. Upstairs, we could hear Carol talking on the phone while rain began tapping against the kitchen window. "Is she going to prison?" Nathan asked. "That's for the courts to decide," I said, "but the evidence is strong. The recording is clear, and 8 other people now have a chance at accountability because you didn't let her finish what she started." He sat quietly for another moment before speaking again. "I'm glad I texted you," he said. "So am I. And Nathan, you came to me. That matters. Never stop doing that." He smiled slightly, a genuine and relaxed smile. We stayed at the table until Carol came back downstairs and the rain became heavier. Eventually, the three of us moved to the living room and watched an old hockey game that Nathan and I didn't really care about. Carol eventually fell asleep in her armchair with her feet tucked under her. It was an ordinary evening at home. After everything that had happened, ordinary felt exactly right. Before finishing, I want to say something clearly as someone who spent more than 30 years working in financial crime investigations. Fraud like this exists because it works. It does not target foolish people, it targets trusting people. It affects individuals who are open to connection, relationships, and the possibility of something positive. The most sophisticated financial predators do not search for naive victims. They look for people who are emotionally available. They take their time. They build genuine warmth and trust before introducing a single financial idea. By the time the investment conversation begins, the victim is already in a relationship that feels real, because in many ways it is. Time has been spent together, affection has been exchanged, and a sense of understanding has developed. Often, the warning signs are only obvious later or to someone observing from the outside. Some common warning signs include investment returns that sound unusually high. Anything consistently above 8 or 9% annually should raise serious questions. A fund that cannot be verified through provincial securities regulators. A business address that turns out to be a mail forwarding service rather than a real office. Urgent deadlines designed to pressure quick decisions. Resistance to independent legal or financial review of documents. None of these signs alone guarantee fraud. However, they are clear signals to slow down and investigate carefully. In Canada, investment funds must be registered with provincial securities regulators. Anyone can verify a fund or advisor through the Canadian Securities Administrators National Database at securities-administrators.ca. The process takes about 3 minutes and costs nothing. Those 3 minutes might become the most